Hi, and welcome to Network AF. Today, I'm pleased to have my friend, Jay Adelson, who I've known for many decades and used his services, and I'm proud to have him as an investor in my projects with us. And Jay, could you give us a quick intro? Tell us about Jay.
Sure. Well, first of all, Avi, I'm honored to be with you today. It's always an honor to be speaking to you and fun. So I'm Jay. I've been in the internet business since 1993, give or take, when I was broke trying to be a filmmaker and audio engineer. And a friend of mine, Jeff Rizzo, got me a job at Netcom installing routers for people. And that was a very long time ago. And then if you just sort of like hit me in the back of the head with a bottle and I wake up 30 years later, founded 14 companies, most of them failures, a few good ones, known for probably Equinix and Digg and Revision 3 and a couple other things in there, and ended up kind of leaving that world and becoming a pinball professional. And that is why I'm sitting in my office filled with pinball machines right now.
So that's pinball design, creation, repair, playing?
Well, there's an internet twist to this, right? I mean, Come on, there has to be an internet twist.
Yes, of course.
I'm really into retro stuff. And so I just thought it would be really fun to be able to connect to old arcade games, mostly pinball, but basically anything, and push the scores and achievements like you do on Xbox Live. And didn't quite anticipate just how challenging a technical task that would be. And that was like 7 years ago, which is crazy to think. But I mean, I still operate a venture fund, the one that we invested in Kentic with and that, but I pretty much stepped out of that world in 2017 to do this always, which is, I know.
So you're IoT at the end.
I'm IoT. I know we were an internet infrastructure and IoT investor.
Yes.
And I remember learning that IoT is a terrible business. And then I went and founded an IoT company.
Well, it seems to be doing okay for Samsara and some others, that started really about the time of Kentic. And, I don't come from the SCADA land and all that, but turns out there seems to be a good business in connecting fleets and pumps and stuff like that. So I just happen to come from the other side of it. Gail, I don't have it all set up. Gail does not prefer, she doesn't love my hobby of collecting vintage 8-bit computers back from when you could understand everything about the hardware, software. If I were actually at home, instead of having a background of at home, I'd show you the Commodore 64 over there, or K-Pro. Go and get a K-Pro or an Acorn if I was talking to someone from the UK. But she calls it AMOS, Avi's Museum of Stuff.
That's awesome. By the way, if you're interested in taking over my collection of Apple IIs, I have every model. 32 of them.
I am very interested.
Really?
I have a warehouse, thanks to a friend of mine, not warehouse, sorry, it's a storage unit. It's actually, it's effectively on the Ashburn campus. So, the post office that Equinix kicked out, that's on the original Equinix campus there, or in not the original, but the
I remember it had a catwalk for people with guns.
Yeah. So that all got torn down, and I don't know, it was DC-11 or something. So the Guardian self-storage there, and so a friend of mine gave me one of every, not a Sun 1 or no, there is a Sun 2, and then every Sun 3 and 4 and Spark up to a 450. I don't have like an E10K.
Wow.
Actually, no, there is a 4500. Which used to be the cheapest way to get a lot of RAM used, but the power bill was not fun. So
now, are they operational?
In theory, I haven't fired them up, but I have a bit image of 413U1 and 414 with my custom kernel for SynFlood, for like Syn cookies that we had to do back when Panix was a customer who was being attacked. So
wow,
the fun old days. But you
Yeah.
Worked at DEC.
I did. I worked in the network systems laboratory, which sounds so like I might know something about networking. Believe me, I don't. Like the thing about the NSL was it was like the Loss Isley or Moss Isley.
Moss Isley.
Like
we call that Usenet now. A wretched hive of bugs and flamers. Yes.
I
or Digg or
or
whatever.
I just couldn't believe I was there. Like I felt like I was like somebody was going to figure me out, and that I was like imposter syndrome in the middle of this lab next to Paul Vixie, and Steven Stewart and, and of course, Al Avery.
Yeah.
And all of these guys who were really doing cool stuff. And I was so excited. And they could tell. They could tell. But I was hopelessly addicted to this idea of internet scale. And I perhaps became a little too obsessed with it to my wife, Brenda. She still makes a joke that if my phone rings in the middle of the night, she always says the same thing, which is tell him to reboot the Portmaster.
Which is for the Portmaster, yes. Yeah.
Livingston Portmaster was like, most early ISPs use something similar for all.
They use that, or if I had an updated picture of my actual background at home, I have a micro annex terminal server. I use the Xylogix annex. Later Wellfleet, I guess, bought them.
There was a lot of late nights, and I was an operations manager. To be clear, I was like some people have said, "Oh, Jay founded PAX." That's not really true. I mean, it was operational as an exchange point for easily a year before.
Well, I remember. Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves because we have to talk about. I remember when I first. Okay. So who did start it? It was for Alta Vista connectivity, or
it's an interesting. So I would love for Paul or Steven to one day get into the really boring details of this, because I'll tell you what I know, right? Was that when I was running network engineering and operations at Netcom, which I again have no idea how that happened, but I was operating there. The DEC Network Systems Lab is in Palo Alto, and it was in the basement of what is currently now the PAX. And Paul, who was part of the lab working for Brian Reed, who was the director of the lab, had somehow convinced Bill Yunt and a couple other folks involved with Barnet and Alternet, who had been exchanging traffic in the Stanford lab, computer lab, I believe.
Because I remember Paul had showed me the Ames side. No, he showed me the kicks. He showed me the kicks, not the Ames side of May West. He showed me the commercial internet exchange, which was in some office park, because it was the secrets of peering and if you go to the kicks, do you get
That's
peering?
Right. No, that's right. And I think that Paul is a visionary in a lot of ways. And I think that one of the things that he recognized around this time when he was, helping to, I think, administrate that interconnect, is he figured out that there was a huge issue on where a place was and who was operating it, because, in the case of Stanford, I think they had a squirrel literally take out the data center and take out like half of the western seaboard of the internet for some period of time. I mean, it's a story that everyone tells in some form.
I've never heard it, but I'll ask.
But I mean, everyone's got a squirrel was in the power box story about their data center going down.
This is before I hit the EPO button to exit.
I mean, that would make a lot of sense, right? And so, you lean against something and it pops off. I guess Stanford's setup had never been set up for, reliability. Neither was the basement of the Network Systems Lab, but somehow Paul convinced Alternet and Barnet to move into that basement and
just
connect.
For people to keep track. So Alternet was commercial. Barnet was the Bay Area regional network that was, they were all semi-commercial, the regional networks, but it was sort of the government NSF, access network. So
right. This is before the official,
right.
Or this is just after the contract was handed, I think, to the various carriers. Yeah. And he moves it in there, and I think he DEC was also a hardware manufacturer and manufactured network switches, and they made a FIDI switch or a fiber interconnect. Mm-hmm. And so he had them, I think, originally connecting on a Cisco, like serial number 1 of some old Cisco. And then he, in parallel, he started the commercial internet exchange with Barb Dooley. And that initially, I think, was a lobbying organization designed to sort of speak on behalf.
The policy side of it, right? And peering and yeah.
Exactly. Because I don't think that, at that time it was anarchy. It was the Wild West, right? And there wasn't a lot of regulation or oversight or thought given to how this stuff rolled out. And I think that Paul felt very strongly that it should be community-based managed exchange point. And meanwhile, though, he was doing this at Digital. And so Digital decided to productize it as a business unit inside of the Network Systems Laboratory. And when that happened, that's when Al Avery took over as the general manager, and he hired me to basically run operations. And yeah, I mean, by the way, I think that Paul was right on a lot of fronts in that, there is challenges when you're commercially driven, right? Because you're on behest of the shareholders, and that's an issue. The flip side, though, is community-based organizations. Just ask all the European exchange point operators to move anything one port over is like a year of debate. And
I remember, because contemporaneously, Doug Humphrey had showed me a year before, like the 1919 Gallows basement, May East, where UUNet and PSI routers were on a power strip on a 2-prong extension cord plugged into the wall. And, I remember visiting PAX, and of course, Alta Vista was there, and Alta Vista was the cool search engine at the time to use the DEC hardware, which I was a fan of. I'm not a big VMS fan, but, I other than architecture, but, more of a Unix guy. But I remember thinking, wow, this is real, because, going to Kix, going to May East, going to May West, and, with no offense to our, MFS sisters and brothers, it was a little bit of a hack job. It was like my colo in Philly, where I convinced MFS to give me a rack for every T1 that I sold. And suddenly I owned this whole data center. It was all DC power and, had only AC equipment. And they're like, what are all these computer things that you're putting in our building? Yeah. But it was, it was like a room in an office building full of lawyers. And, I remember going to PAX, I was like, ooh, they only turn on, because the guard thing was upstairs. To go downstairs, they only turn on the lights for the people that are there, so you can't really snoop quite as much. There was a set of rules you had to follow, and I was like, wow, this is getting real.
Yeah, I have to say, I remember that a lot of that feeling was planned and thought through by Brian Reed. Brian, who, brilliant, network engineer who ran the systems laboratory there, hired an art designer to come up with colors and patterns and fun lighting to try and make a very small space evoke some kind of sense of safety and reliability and importance. And the thought there was, well, you're kind of, building an empty exchange point and hoping people will come. And I think the idea was that if you build it and you enforce these rules and you're think about it in the tradition of maybe the finance and the banking industry,
but not as annoying as doing colo in a CO, with a phone company, which was very annoying at the time.
I mean, there was a certain amount of lipstick on the pig, so to speak. A certain amount of it was dressing in front of what was a very roughly built data center that was incredibly effective, giving it was 5,000 square feet.
Right. Yeah.
So people who are like building their first data center at 250,000 square feet.
And how many gigawatts was it? How many gigawatts? How many?
Oh man, I
200 kVA?
Less than that. I mean, I think we might have said that. And I remember negotiating with
for software people out there, like you can now have the equivalent of like 20 houses of power in one cabinet with or without, immersive cooling. But at the time, it was not that much more than a few light bulbs per cabinet worth of, heat and power that one was dispersing. So that was the internet. That was the core.
I mean, by the way, if you want training on how not to build a data center, one of the things you could do is take someone familiar with building out points of presence like I was and put them in this, spaghetti setup and tell them that the entire internet depended on its functionality. Right. And we had some great assistants. There was a contracting firm named MCM and this guy named Jim Brush who looked like the prospector from like the Toy Story movies, like exactly the same. And he would walk in and basically explain how in the days that they invented electricity, this was how they solved this problem for, this or that. And I learned all the lingo and learned basically how to talk to electrical engineers, not necessarily how to be one, but, certainly how to understand that. And I think that Al and I that was when we started fantasizing over beers and cigars, how to, how could we do it? If money was no object, what would it look like? And how could we grow this thing? Because we were also friends with all of the network operators and they would complain about, Tyson's Corner, a parking garage and
8100 Boone, 1919 Gallows,
And there was one exchange point, I believe somebody actually perished due to an electrical accident. I don't know if you knew about that. We won't name any names, but some of the folks watching your video will probably remember that. I think it was right around had to have been 98 or 99. There was an incident where an electrical technician in a carrier exchange point touched the wrong thing. It was not good. And
I went to the Pensacola Nap and I remember, that was a little bit too real. That was more like, that was closer to the CO level of, how things thought, but it was pretty big, for what was there.
It's arguably true that carriers knew more about compacting a lot of network in a small space better than anybody else. Sure. I just think that it was never a question of someone losing a lot of money. Well, at least from a commercial internet standpoint, until way later. And once you got to that point where content eyeballs and the path between them kind of leveled out in importance in the ecosystem, then you kind of had to change the way you designed all that stuff, but that was really fun.
I remember being at a Nanog, unlike some people, I can't remember, like, yes, Nanog 12 was in this city and, whatever. And I think it was you had announced, maybe Bill was up there, had announced Equinix. And I'm like, Equinix, they make serial port cards. It's like, what? But But you mentioned rules, and so we do have to tell the story about the cutting off of the non-Telstra transit of Australia. I have a friend. I sometimes, I definitely try to figure out what are all the ways to interpret the rules, to create good for humanity and myself. But we knew one of the rules of PAX was thou shalt not run thine own cross connects. Right now, a lot of people in data centers now will use passive optics to pay for a cross connect and make 8 cross connects in it, or Packet Fabric version 1. Equinix got upset with me, and so we should have shut down. Because it was clear that we were trying to do multi data center, but when people figured out it was cheaper to do exchange in the building over it, this is before OpenIX started to drive the prices down. But so my friend and person who's less, he is aware of the rules, but feels less constrained by them, Andrew Koo, had run a cross connect between we each had a cabinet, Net Access had a cabinet, and our cage, not cabinet. Sorry, no, not cage, relay rack.
That's right.
Sorry, relay rack.
That's right.
Not even cage or cabinet. I'm thinking, modern. And I was giving him transit over, I think actually I was tunneling to make it look like I had, at least line to that location. And then he called me and he said, Avi, my transit's down. I think I was running AJS Plus at the time. And I remember getting a call from you, hugely apologetic. And he's like, Avi, I'm really torn here because you guys violated the policy, but you should never interrupt operating networks. We should talk about these things.
No, wait. Okay. So here's the untold part of this story.
Okay.
All right. So to be clear, you end up by terminating this cross connect, you definitely turn off a good portion of the continent of Australia. So,
right.
So, probably not a great decision. So we had an operations manager at the time who worked for me, a guy named John Pedro. And almost anybody who was in the internet space back then knew who John was. A very sweet guy who worked at the PAX and was responsible for, sort of managing the day-to-day task work of the technicians who run the cross connects. And he discovered this cross connect, which was surreptitiously run between 2 points, and told me about it and asked me what I thought he should do. And I said, well, I think you should email everyone and let them know. And apparently this went on for several months where John was emailing someone.
Okay.
By the way, I don't know if it was Stuart or Andrew. Like, I don't know who it was he was emailing, if he was doing it right. Probably should have been me. We had no escalation process for this.
Because remember, we're circuit database.
But the thing is that I think this might be revisionist memory, but the way I remember it was we discovered it and we said, hey, if you pay us whatever the cross connect price is per month, we're good. Just send us the money, and we'll be good. I have no idea how billing worked at Digital. Like I can't remember. I remember we had just invented these terms of CNI and GNI and INI and PNI. And we were like inventing one for within a cage kind of thing. And I guess some time passed and I don't know, it makes me remember when it happened because it was in the middle of the night. I got a call. Actually, I got a page.
And you said, reboot the port master.
Basically, this is down and this is a big deal because it affected a lot of other folks.
So at the time, this was supporting satellite-based bandwidth augmentation. So people would buy their E1s in Australia and they'd be full on the inbound side, but they'd have more outbound. So we were selling, 8 meg circuits that were, basically one-way frame relay for people to get excess capacity for, and they could make SSH and IRC go over terrestrial and Usenet and web caching go over, satellites. So it was a lot of circuits where, and for latency, it was satellite backed, but this was supporting this is the transit for that satellite thing. So there were a lot of small networks. It wasn't affecting Telstra, but there were a lot of small networks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other problem was how he did it, because back then our cross connects were largely, I think, multimode fiber, if I recall, and he cut it with a pair of scissors.
Yeah. He didn't just pull it out. Yeah.
I don't know. Like he would get angry sometimes. And this must have really made, you have to understand, he was a very sweet guy, like very peaceful. He would calm you down, very well organized, not the kind of guy that would do something vindictively in any way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. And so for him to cut it with a pair of scissors, which is the part I remember, implies a long history of battle.
With prejudice, yes.
Yeah. PAX had a cable plant. It had a paper system for knowing, what was plugged into what. It had all of these sort of like inherited characteristics from the Paul Vixie,
and also
Barnett days.
Is definitely, real engineering, scientific computing and business computing and,
it's, there is a well, here's the ultimate thing about that whole operation is that it never went away. Like the PAX would later, become acquired by
Switching data?
No, before that it was
MFN. AboveNet, yeah. Sorry, I was there. What was the name? I was running engineering at the time, yeah.
What was it was AboveNet was acquired then though.
That by MFN.
By MFN, and then
right.
And then MFN acquired, I think, or I don't know which order, but had the PAX. Mm-hmm. And then later Switch and Data acquired them.
Right. Or acquired PAX from MFN, maybe.
That sounds right.
We can look it up.
Yeah. And then ironically, I don't know, a decade later, maybe more.
It's like Chad Gadya, but with networks.
Exactly. I mean, everything came round.
Yes.
And Equinix ended up owning the PAX. And that it was after I hadn't returned to the building the entire time until Equinix acquired PAX, like, I don't know, 15 years later or something like that. And despite the fact that the original deal, when Al and I left PAX, the deal we struck with Bill Strecker, who was the CTO of Digital at the time, because Digital was getting acquired by Compaq,
yeah,
was that if they were going to sell, that we would get a right of first refusal. And let's just say that, and we agreed on a price. I think it was like 30 million or something like that.
That's advantageous to fix a price.
Yeah, and I think it sold to AboveNet for like 2 or 3 times that. So we were out of the market. But yeah, came around.
So
it's a funny.
Thank you for Equinix. Equinix is a customer. We have some stuff in DRT, but for the most part, I'm an old server hugger. So as a SaaS company, we make our own cloud in Equinix. Back where wonderful. I used to have my Usenet, where I bootstrapped, Cloud Helix, that Kentek on my Usenet servers. But what was it like during hypergrowth? Because,
yeah, I mean, I would love to tell you that it's funny because now looking back across my career, I think really only twice or 3 times I've been operating a business or co-operating a business that had a hypergrowth phase at all, right? And the Equinix one was brutal. It was uncomfortable. We raised just under $1 billion.
That used to be a lot of money before crypto, before content.
Well, remember, so this is pre-Nasdaq crash. We raised $1 billion, well, not $1 billion, but like 800 million across 3 years or 4 years, to the credit of Peter Van Camp, who we brought in to run the business, and Keith Taylor and Phil Keown, who was the CFO at the time. I mean, we did some really crazy financial deals, and started an extremely aggressive build out with Bechtel Corporation to build out all
you paid someone to build the data centers. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we came up with a lot of original concepts and we designed them, had our own internal design team. And we even hired John Pedro. Yes, he worked for Equinix after that.
Well, I remember that when things got tough, they stopped putting game rooms in the, in the Equinixes. So,
yeah, I think, so I remember seeing you about the time that I knew that I couldn't stay because I was so stressed out. I mean, so first of all, you had the Nasdaq crash, and if having your entire net worth and the company's net worth wiped away in the course of 6 months while your company's locked up from an IPO, I mean, that'll do it to anybody. But then throw on top of that the entire community of customers were going out of business.
Yep. At Akamai, we discovered that, like we were watching DSO, day sales outstanding, and it wasn't that our customers had stopped paying, which is what we thought. I remember when Tim Weller was the CFO came in and he realized that our customers didn't exist anymore. Like half our customers just didn't exist.
It's crazy the amount of equipment that would go abandoned inside the Equinix data centers. And so we had a bunch of construction projects around the world that were like 1/4 of the way done. And we realized that the only way to survive as a company was to pull out of those 20-year lease agreements and stop construction and lay off 3/4 of our team. And this is like all probably 2 or 3 weeks after 9/11. So this is hypergrowth during that initial phase where, I learned what a sales marketing kickoff was, and that, and watching the contracts come in and,
it was like Cisco in the 90s when, the fax machine was out of paper and people would, line up at the door to shove checks in your pocket, because like
it was a great spoiling of engineers around the world, because that was when we decided it was okay to spend $250,000 on a box at the core of your network, and I think before that point, ISPs would do that to a certain extent, the BFRs and whatever, but there was this sort of limitless bank account that existed on the part of our customers, and sitting in the middle, you got to play with all this really fun stuff. But then when it ended, and I had to basically cut the entire R&D team. And we had some great guys, Ted Hardy and, Sean Donnellan and Ian Cooper was there. And, we had Dwayne Wessels working on caching, back then. And we had this like crazy, great, fun, team that all had to go at the same time. And I remember seeing you because I think it was around the time Richard Clarke,
yes,
was running the cybersecurity. Yep. What was he running? So he was the cybersecurity advisor for multiple presidents. And so he got us involved when I was at Akamai with the National Communication System, NCS, before DHS, was formed. And so I think I went to the White House for something. Because everything was stressful. We were like under attack. We were at war. Everything bad was happening. And I was on the road all the time. And I remember like I had pulled an all-nighter preparing for something. So I don't remember what government thing. And I'm waiting outside some office and I hear your laugh from behind the door. Right. And you came out all like, chummy with, I think it was Richard Clarke. And I'm like, wow, Akamai got here first. I can't win. There's no way I can win this. he's already here. He already is telling people that peering is overrated, right? And
I've always been a big fan of peering.
I know, but we were both. You were correctly advising that we needed to revise our infrastructure in the sense
So that was the thing that I did, which is ironic because someone just asked me to support. Job Snyder's just asked us at Kentech if we'll support SBGP. I think it's now called Secure BGP. I'm like, oh my God, the 90s wants its protocols back, but we actually have fast computers, so we can do path validation. So for Richard Clarke, I wrote something which is like, we should filter the source addresses of our packets, and we should secure the routing, and we should use the government purchasing power, which lasted like 2 minutes until the lobbyists heard about it. And, I was like, everyone's worried about the authoritative name servers. That's not the problem. It's anycasted recursive name servers, and we should support the infrastructure. And he had a good heart for that.
And I think thanks to you, called on a bunch of others. I remember, and Vince Cerf and Kathy Aronson. And I just remember sitting around a table being fully intimidated and realizing that I kind of used up my resilience. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there was a certain sense of responsibility. And I think you probably felt the same thing where, we had kind of had fun building this thing and it had been this really fun sort of rise. And you know what? This was pretty serious stuff. And I had 3 little kids that I wasn't seeing ever because I was traveling all the time. And I was, in DC half the time. Because remember, I lived in San Francisco back then. And then right around that point, I moved to rural New York to try and escape. That's pretty much when I think I went to my last ripe and my last nanog for like a decade. It was right around that time. And I was planning on getting a teaching certificate and becoming a public school teacher and just disappearing entirely.
Interesting.
Yeah, that didn't work out as planned. But yeah, I remember like at that moment, I'll never forget hearing your laugh and thinking, it's got to be Avi on the other side of that door. And it was.
It's funny because my brother Noam has a distinctive laugh also. You can tell wherever he is on a floor. And now he's running, he's just moved from running network, I think, at Akamai to, cloud, but they call it compute because they partner with cloud providers, but after buying Linode. But it was something I spent a long time at Akamai not getting them to, start up a cloud. But I mean, I think there's a couple things that, I've definitely felt imposter syndrome, and with some of the same people, right? I mean, I was not a fan of the Maps RBL, but my interview for AboveNet was, for various reasons, writing a BGP daemon to do optimized routing. There's some other stuff that didn't exist. And then Dave Rand gave it to Paul Vixie, who after he got it, sent me 5 one-line corrections to my 3,000 line BGP daemon, and to make it better, fix a bug and make it better. And I was like, wow, I'm not worthy. And then someone was like, Avi, who writes a BGP daemon for an interview?
And by the way, can we just stop right there for a second? You wrote what? I mean, look,
lots of people have. It's a time-honored way to take the internet down, is to write your own BGP daemon. That's true. Paul, at that next level. And so it's all in context, right? I mean, you were, I'm going to say, the Forrest Gump. Are you saying you're the Forrest Gump of the internet? You just happened to be there when all these things happened around you?
It's a little bit like that. I mean, I like to tell my kids.
And Equinix, in a lot of what is still there today, in great culture, is because of you and Bill and other people that, weren't there for, decided not for various reasons to be there for, the whole stay, but, made the mark. On the other hand, what I hear you saying, not to put words in your mouth, is you do have to pay attention to what's in your head and not, sometimes, if you need a change, you need a change. So
I think so. And I think to some extent, I recognized how big, now Equinix is a Fortune 500 company. It's a very different universe. It's I think known by its employees to be a wonderful place to work, and they treat their people extremely well. They've sort of come back from sort of a position of, sort of too much strength to one of a little more humility, despite their size, and I think have done a lot of soul searching as a business over the last 15, 20 years. And really it's a different place and a great place. But my strength was in the people part and the sort of the growth early stage of a business, where you have to kind of accept a certain measure of more risk and more sort of product development, trials and failures, and a certain amount of mentoring. So part of what I love to do, and I was so grateful that Al Avery gave me the opportunity to do this, at PAX and then later as a co-founder, I would find people who were phenomenally good at something, way better than I was, and I would say, hey, I'll take care of you and make you VP of something, but I have one request, and that is that you allow me to ask you stupid questions in front of your team so that I can learn. And I love that. And then there become a point where that was like actually interfering.
By the way, I prefer to say foundational questions, not
Well, I always sort of presented it on my sleeve, like, hey, a classic example is, I manage coders all the time now. A lot of what I do is small, right? And so I end up contracting coders or hiring them directly. And I learned to code in college, right? I have no miles whatsoever. And so I'll be like, hey, so I realize in the public Slack channel, you don't like me asking you stupid questions about syntax. But do you mind if I ask, because I love to do code review and I love to learn about code because I have a nerdy curiosity on how it all works, or frameworks, or what have you. And so I slowly teach myself to code, in the background in private. But if you want to work with me, sorry, you have to be willing to deal with.
Generally, I found technologists to be better than doctors. I've offered to pay a lot of doctors to answer my questions, and but that's to say the doctors are really busy, and multitask.
Well, so are developers and engineers.
But I've been more frustrated and my father, who is a doctor, is like, I don't know, I just do what they tell me. It's like, well, I'm sorry, that's not me. Like, I need to understand. If I don't understand, I can't. That's always been my problem. I was upset I missed RSA this week because Nanog conflicted. And that's part of what I do at a trade show, is go around and try to figure out, I see what value is delivered. I understand the marketing, but if I don't know what it actually does, I can't reason about it. And,
that's right.
The body is like the internet. It's amazing that it works at all. Much less, it's not amazing that it breaks sometimes. It's amazing that it works at all. So,
and all of the things that go wrong with the body also go wrong with the internet. That's
also true. And it's a complex distributed system with interdependencies, and the symptom that you're seeing is maybe not the organ or the thing that is the actual problem, underneath. But I remember thinking when you had left, and I don't know if it was a year or whatever, and you popped up as CEO at Digg. And I remember someone I went to Hebrew school with had started CD Now with his brother. And sold it. And I remember sending a note to my ISP saying, I guess the real money's in content, not infrastructure. and so it was like,
is it though? What? But is it though?
I don't know. Well, the jury's out. We'll have to wait and tally up. But
that was so much fun. Avi, I cannot tell you how luxurious it is to be a consumer of internet services versus a manager of them. I gave one talk at Nanog as the CEO of Digg, where the whole point of it was, wow, it looks different from over here. It looks so different. And I got to play with things that I never thought I would get to play with because I was finally, building a presence. And, we had our versions of, I don't know what you call it, product innovation or, web 2.0 stuff that we were doing that was interesting. I was really obsessed with, egalitarian, democratization. After all, neutrality, I was, me. I was super big on this whole idea that, conflicts of interest ruin ecosystems. And so,
they're never that simple. Net neutrality, it's like, okay, well, you need to have equal access, and maybe the government paid for you to build your network, so it's not really yours. On the other hand, if you can't filter DDoS, then the internet doesn't work. And what is free speech was a little different in the 90s before people were doxing and sending killers to people's houses. And so it's as much as you want to be purist, the world has gotten definitely a lot more grayscale.
Well, this is right. You're 100% correct. It's not simple. And the complexity of taking a vision, whether it be an architecture for a network or even a business model, right? Any of that complexity that you introduce to it, your vision has to compromise. It is a nature of how it works, right? There's a purist sort of view, and there's components of it that compromise. And it's that act of introducing complexity to your simple vision that is the challenge, I think, the thing that sort of sucks the resilience out of you, right? And so if you can manage to process that, there was this one time at Digg when, I don't know if you would remember this, but remember HD DVD?
Yeah.
And so there was Blu-ray was fighting for dominance over HD DVD. Mm-hmm. And some users, remember, so just for your viewers, so Digg was a website where you would submit a story in the form of, you could put a thumbnail on it, a title that you would write, a link, and a description if you wanted to put a description, right? It would pull metadata if it existed. Remember, this is 2008 or 2007. So, there's only so much metadata. And then you'd submit this to sort of a pooling area called Upcoming, and people would see that and vote on it by digging. And after a certain algorithm filter would pass, it would go to the front page of the website. And then because of the attention the front page got, it would be like a fire hose of traffic to whatever got there. So there's a huge competition.
There was this thing called the Slashdot effect before that.
That's right.
And then it became Digg, yeah.
That's exactly right. And so what happened was, Digg attracted a lot of, network people, like nerds like me, hackers, people who loved Kevin Rose and his sort of hacker TV show, and a whole lot of those kinds of folks. And so it had a very technical bent to it, although it was also, there'd be links that were completely sensational too, right? Mm-hmm. But one day somebody posted the encryption key for HD DVD.
Right.
And when this is, after DMCA, takedown notices and chilling effects was out there. And the EFF.
I was running a Usenet provider at the time, so had to deal with
that there was a lot of complexity and debate over who owned the content and whether or not it should be pulled down. Like who can, like if
someone was just taken off of Google last week. I forget who, by a DMCA complaint. It was back in like a day, but yeah. I mean,
we were new to this and we were popular, and someone posted it and it got so many votes, it went to the homepage. So then we get the takedown notice, and I meet with my buddy Kevin about what to do. And we were like, oh, well, I guess we'll just take it down. It was sort of already lower and lower and lower, and then it was off the homepage anyway. So we took it down, and the users didn't like that. So they reposted it again. And this process started to escalate. So finally, they were posting it like once every 2 seconds, faster than we could manually take it down. So we wrote some code to take it down, right?
To filter
it out. And then they started recording themselves on video, playing guitar, singing the code.
So you couldn't filter it, right?
And it just started escalating. And it got to the point where they took down our website, effectively a DDoS attack.
Right.
And then we posted on our blog, the title of the blog was the code from HD DVD. And we're like, you're right. It doesn't belong to us. It belongs to you, right? And that was like a big awareness when you talk about that. When I talk about the resilience being, you think that a simple idea like neutrality can be compromised. And then to some extent it can be. But when you introduce some of these things, they also become religion.
Emergent. Yes, that's the word I was looking for. And, there's a science fiction series, Ender's Game. And I don't know if you've read the book. There's a movie. But in the book, these two really bright kids become Locke and Demosthenes. And there's this idea of this worldwide thing. But even there, it's like there's a contrast, because there's the theory that was not like Usenet at the time, or Digg, or anything, or Reddit, or anything, of like rational discourse, like, Socrates and, arguing with people. But it wasn't, but that we've never seen that. On the other hand, the idea of like people smart enough to actually influence the masses and drive emergent behavior, we're seeing that with influencers. So
that's right.
It's a pretty, as a company, or as not that kind of, you have to have the sense of what is, and sometimes, it can get away from you,
Well,
to the users.
And it's sort of an evolution of the anarchy, or the internet. The internet had the advantage of being an unregulated and anarchistic entity where, you would sometimes get de facto standardization way ahead of IETF, way ahead of, John and RFC saying, there was some kind of official way of doing something, because we just didn't have time to wait, right? It was growing that fast. It's funny because on the sidelines, while I'm not, operating network companies, I am on the board of Megaport, and I do, of course, I'm a network geek, and I always will be. So I'm like watching with amusement, Ethernet.
And these questions we argued about. What happens if there's 200 milliseconds between peers? Do bad things happen? It was a question we had in the 90s, and now we know.
It is a computer science problem, right? And you introduce real life and randomness and anarchy into these computer science models, and things sometimes happen that you don't anticipate.
Well, I think that
cool.
It is. And also it's something that I'm going to say good startups, in my opinion, learn to embrace at a micro level, is like, hey, we tried this and it didn't work. Now, it can be frustrating when you try it at a macro level and it doesn't work, but some great companies that have created a lot of value, I'm not just saying economically, but for users, came from things that didn't work. Slack, I don't really understand. It just looks like a chat that doesn't crash, but clearly people like it. And that came from a gaming company or, often it was like a whole company that didn't work. And then that taught the lessons. The biggest one that I struggle with is focus, because you have customers that want stuff, you want to build it, but then, that becomes difficult. Or, really what you see is when you're building a company, you try to engineer what you want that to be. And most companies just become emergently copies of, the first employees, and how they operate. And that's been a really interesting time for people, growing through COVID, where stuff that was undocumented and emergent and understood, becomes, and some companies designed for that. Very few before COVID were like, we are remote first. We don't have hybrid meetings. We're very thoughtful about this. And then, like actually letting people talk over the internet, thank God, works really well. But the human dynamics of it, obviously is a little tricky.
Oh, I agree 100%. I mean, I launched my most recent business in September of 2020.
What is that?
It's Scorbit, which is the pinball company.
Pinball.
I actually planned on launching it in March of 2020. Mm-hmm. We have some like fun investors like Matthew Prince and, and like we have like a bunch of network guys who are involved in this tiny, by the way, it's a small business. It's not a venture-backed business. It's,
You say small business, not, by the way, I don't view lifestyle business as a negative thing. I know in Silicon Valley, it's viewed as a negative word, but I don't.
Yeah, I'm definitely building this. Let me put it this way. In certain markets and certain products, if you don't have a big pool of capital to very quickly land grab and establish a first mover advantage, you can't succeed. And I'm not saying that it's always good to do that, but a lot of the times it makes a lot of sense. I decided to go after something retro and build a network infrastructure for it, largely because I knew that no one else was crazy enough to try it. It would require years of R&D to make work. And then once it worked, my audience was this fascinatingly diverse international crowd.
Of largely high net worth, but not all.
It's true. It's true, because pinball tends to be,
right.
Of course, the Brewcade started growing and all these arcades and stuff.
Do the new employees have to read Armada and Ready Player One to get the 80s context?
Oh, if they haven't read it already, they're not allowed in the door. But I'll tell you, it is interesting. If you look at the cast of characters, if we had the Topps playing cards for Nanog or whatever, and you just sort of dealt out a random 10 from your deck of cards, I guarantee most of those people would probably either own or regularly play a pinball machine.
Yeah, for whatever, I was more Dig Dug to Relax and Galaxian, and I preferred writing stuff than to play. And I think Zaxxon on the, was like this cool 3D thing, but I didn't get into pinball for whatever reason. So,
and I didn't get into it as much either. I don't know about you, but the first time a networked game became available, the first one I remember that I played there was a game called Spectre 7 on the Mac. And it was sort of Battlezone, but multiplayer Battlezone.
Uh-huh.
And it was like 1994 Apple Talk.
You have to remember, I ran metaverses. We called them multi-user dungeon games. But that was how I learned IPC and distributed processing and all that. It was an 80 by 24 metaverse. So,
I mean, I think, and I don't know how many of us fit this model, but from a very young age, the thing that kept me dialing that modem over and over again, but it was, the connectivity with other people was just, a
lot of people that were hams that went into, started ISPs and stuff like that. I do have fondness for Gauntlet needs more quarters badly. It wasn't network, but you could play with your friends. So that was fun.
There is an interesting question, which is if you went back in time to 1984 or something, or 82, and you walked into an arcade and Zaxxon was connected to a Zaxxon somewhere else.
Wow. Yeah, that would have been the shit.
It would have been
someone else's fighter. Robotron was too intense to have any third axis of other people, participating. But yeah, that's true. Or even Battlezone, you're right.
I just feel like there is a nicely contained limited network problem that I tried to solve. So on one hand, we had to have the latencies of an MMO.
Right.
We're not doing really head to head because we don't really have to. It's a turn-based world, but the visualizations and the response time had to have MMO latencies. And yet we had the volume that was so low that it's, from a financial standpoint, you can't, and
you don't need to buy 800,000 servers and distribute them around the world. And yeah.
So we're doing it serverless, the whole thing. The whole thing. It is so much fun to do it this way. I mean, it's inefficient in some ways, but I gotta say, it is like, thanks to folks like you who did all the hard SaaS work over the last 10 years, we don't have to do anything anymore. Yeah. I did go to Equinix just a few days ago because our Force 10 switch in our one rack that me and a bunch of friends still operate, SV1, decided to kick the bucket.
I can hook you up with a used Arista. That'll probably be better than running your Force 10.
We should have shut this off long ago, but we still host NetBeat. Remember Tasty Lime?
Yeah.
It's still operational. And I had to bring Jeff, and it was Jeff Rizzo. And it was so funny because we were like walking to the data center and we hadn't been to network campus.
SV1 is basically in LA from, if you're in, it's like so far south in San Jose that I'm like,
might as well be.
Yes.
But we went from a place where it was an apple orchard, like the last time we were there. And now it's 3-story buildings surrounding us. It was really weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do occasionally go to a data center, but again, I hopefully it's all turnkey now. I could just press a button.
That's right. It's all magic. I can't say we only run our own infrastructure because of the economics, because, it's a nerding thing that I like, but we do, the reason that it works, because every time, half the people that we hire are like, we're doing what? We're making a cloud? Aren't we a SaaS company? Why are we making a cloud? And it's like, look at all these other SaaS companies that make cloud, because they're our customers and they use cloud like we do, but not for always on stuff, because that's really expensive. IDIC, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. That's problem is that is enterprise cloud architecture, but that's a story for another time. So if you could go back and tell young Jay, maybe before Netcom, or at whatever age, a couple things to think about, do, put into lessons to put into context. Do you have any idea what they would be?
Well, the first thing I would say to young Jay is run.
Go teach.
You do end up doing what you love in the long run in whatever job it is that you end up, paying the bills with. If you love to teach, you'll end up being a teacher. If you love to, create new things. But if I could go back and talk to Jay, I would probably tell him that you don't have to be so angry. Mm-hmm. I spent the
take it so personally or be so angry.
It's really both, because the problem is, and I think a lot of investor types try and paint this picture that you need to be somewhat detached in order to be successful. Mm-hmm. But what really happens is the most successful founders are the ones that literally can't do that. their people that they work with are their family. They take every customer negative thing totally personally. And, I had not developed the ability, and I still have not fully, to really roll with that as a young entrepreneur. I was not prepared for what that would do to my life and my family and everything else. And I'm proud that I survived it. But if I could give my former self some lessons, it would be around understanding that balance. Even if I couldn't control it, just understanding it. Because remember, you've got all these mentors and investors who are telling you you shouldn't feel a certain way.
I tried that so Gail and I will be married 30 years, but it's our 31st anniversary of meeting at the Chicago World Science Fiction Convention this year. And I think I tried once or twice saying, okay, well, we've understood what the problem we were disagreeing about, so don't be angry. And I discovered that doesn't work. It's like, don't be ticklish, right?
Yeah, I think that taking it personal is okay. I think my lesson would be taking it personal is okay, but it's what you do with it and how you channel it and your willingness to express yourself, right? I think also my early work was what came out of a lot of insecurity and controlling, trying to sort of control my world and sort of coming to peace with what you can't control is part of that. I mean, I'm 51 now.
Heavy beat.
Yeah. I have 3 kids. I have a 24, 21, and 19-year-old. My 24-year-old was born 2 months before we founded Equinix.
Oh my God.
Right. I mean, I think that the subtext of that lesson is stay home. Right. You only get one time. And now I'm at 28 years, by the way. So, I don't know how Brenda tolerated all those years of it, but that is like if there's one shining thing about that, it's the technical details don't really matter so much. You really just need to learn how to deal with that emotion.
I think that is a great.
You must be feeling it now at Kentic for crying out.
I think I have a slightly different problem because I've seen CEOs that are manic, people that are manic that express it, and either everything is always awesome or everything is horrible. And that can be really damaging. It could be exhausting for everyone around. Now, that's not me. Generally, I'm like, okay, well, I fucked up. Let me not fuck up the same way. Let me, experience is what you get when you didn't get what you want. But what you have to remember when you start a company, and especially if you're CEO and there's hundreds of people, is the words that come out of your mouth, people think are more important than you think, So if you're just talking and thinking off the cuff, then someone's like, oh, but the CEO said this. And I even saw this at Akamai, where all of a sudden 3 people will be working on a project because I was like, wouldn't it be cool to do this? And, it's like, and the manager would come to me, he's like, what did you ask someone to do? I didn't ask anyone to do anything.
Oh, wow.
But, that's something that people remind me. It's like, hey, when you talk to people, remember, so it's not as much, and it's, focus again. Jason Lemkin, I call him the great Lemkoni, he's a SaaS VC. And he hits on, you could critique his content and say, well, it's so repetitive, but you look at his content, which is pointing out what, they tell CEOs as you grow your company, which is if you are only just getting sick of hearing yourself say it, then you haven't said it enough yet.
That's true.
And, in the early days, it's cool to be, holding everything in your head and thinking about all the possibilities. But at some point, especially when you have, 400 customers and 200 people, like not everyone can hold everything in their head and shouldn't, so you need to carefully limit focus. And, if you share everything, it can be hard for people to see the patterns and get the details. So
yeah, your company is not a routing protocol.
Exactly. Well, except it is. I mean, you sort of do have a distributed state.
That's right. Post-pandemic, maybe it is.
But I've seen that. I've worked with some companies where I could see that not everyone has the whole picture. I'm like, oh, I do that. I should, make sure to, enable communication. I think that's the word that is the thing that's most important to engineer around companies, besides some of the core cultural stuff, is communication, which, I could be a better communicator. You talked about Matthew Prince. He's a great communicator. So
yeah, he's fantastic. The challenge right now is that I grew up and enjoyed building businesses where it didn't, they could be businesses that maybe from the outside in looked a little boring, but because the chemistry and the social part of coming to the office every day was fun, and the people I loved to work with, when I would drive to work every day with Jeff Rizzo and Matt Wood, and we would sit in the early Equinix days, and we'd have visits with folks like Martin Levy, and it's like we were all kind of like seeing each other all the time, and riffing off each other and feeling that energy. And in a modern context, and this extends to not just network infrastructure companies, but any company, I think that we lose so much of that, which means that in order to overcome it, we have to over communicate. We have to, have a morning stand up when it's really not, everybody knows what to do already. Like, it's not really, it's more just a social check-in point.
Well, I think we're still figuring that out in conferences. Now things are getting back, but still, how do you have the hallway track without, how do you do that? And then how do you do that in a company, or, build the next Digg type thing, or with what Elon wants to do, without facing the eternal September of Usenet, or the encryption keys of Digg, or the, all these things that happen as emergent behavior. So, and any company, if you look at Apple, what happens when people don't like policy, you get emergent behaviors in companies too. In fact, the more you stand on your principles, the more, it's reasonable for employees to say, hey, if you believe this, then we believe this. So topics for future times. But Jay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Hey, it was my pleasure
for sharing.
It's so great to see your face. It really is.
Great to see you. We need to get you to a Nanog at some point so you can get Bob walking.
I'll do it. I'll do it. And you and I will stand back to back, like in with swords, as
our clue savers. Yes.
There you go. Perfect.
Cool. Well, thanks, and thanks, Jay, and thanks for the audience for listening.